A cacophony of regionality and inclusion is the main title of this. I used to think that you could tell jokes using XML, but keyword lists are the future of humor. I'm Tom Richardson, BookNet Canada's Bibliographic Manager, and this is the 2019 Standards Review. Standards are embedded in everything we do at BookNet. This slide has some of the standards we participate directly in on the right, and on the left you'll find the committees that we are most prominent in. Noah Genner, our CEO, is a member of the ONIX and Thema International Steering Committees. And our Bibliographic Committee acts as the Canadian National Group English Language. For ONIX, and a separate subcommittee functions for Thema, we are always looking for members, and we would be thrilled to talk to anyone who would like to come play. BISG, the Book Industry Study Group, our US-based sister organization, had an interesting year. After completing 3 metadata summits, one for data suppliers, a second for data users, the third joint summit ended without clarifying support for the development of the 3.0 standard in their supply chain. I recommend anyone who's interested in these sorts of things to read the minutes. They're not actually that long, and it's interesting, and there's a lot of detail involved in them. But one outcome was they reorganized their metadata committee, and a new committee was struck called Workflow. Now, I can't speak for BISG, but my summary of that is the metadata committee has been given a marketing focus, and it's being tasked to identify things needed for development. And Workflow will review the trading of information within and between organizations. ONIX is not dead as a standard. And I have to really stress that. The work that editor does is invaluable, and we'd be mad not to continue to utilize them as a resource. Another thing to stress, you still need to support the Canadian author marker. And you should start tracking where they live. Now, Carol sort of said I would explain this, so I'm just going to do a quick reprise. In 2.1, you can support 2 values, and most of you only support one of them. So you can support a country code associated with the contributor, plus a region code, which, if you wanted to, would give the province. In 3.0, you can support those 2 values plus a third one, which is a free text location identifier. And with one other big difference, it's been stuck in a composite and it can repeat. And I don't really have a lot more to say about it than that. On the other hand, Chris Sainer this morning gave a presentation on Thema, and he covered Thema and working in general and referenced contributor place all as part of like what you need to support for diversity. It was a fabulous presentation. If you missed it, you should really, really look for it in the listings. So editors' work and ONIX as a publishing resource finds the right granularity for metadata meaning. Hopefully some of you have attended one of the past ONIX workshops or might do tomorrow's, and you know that editor prides itself on finding just the right amount of granularity. And it's good just to see what that means. And their classic example is the contributor composite, the core which is illustrated here, which uses key names as its linchpin. This is the name group that should be indexed. It's supported by 4 of the name parts named here. They then add 3 ways to support titles and honors. Then they give a pragmatic alternative in person name, which is basically a way to provide a name in a single name field, 2 versions of it. And clearly, parsing names is recommended, and corporate name, so that you can name contributors that are not people. But there are limits. Names before key name, one of the parts off key name, can include both of what we call first and middle names. So it isn't actually good for supporting mail merge. Careful editor cannot identify a need for that in book metadata. That's a value too far. All of which is to say that editor thinks it through, does their homework, asks national groups for input, supports only what's necessary for books. If they tell you to parse names 5 ways for international data, they are right. You, as a local business, may choose to only support key and names before key names, because that in our market actually handles most of what you need to cover. Your company's metadata is independent, but it should go through a similar process to what editor does, which is they review what they have done in the past and they tweak it, which explains many of the changes that you'll find in ONIX 3.0. Now, just to give you some numbers, the contributors composite has existed for 15 years. 10% of the current ONIX data submissions to BiblioShare don't support key name values, and I'd be surprised if 40% of it you supported corporate name distinct from people. Which leads one to ask an interesting question about what's the minimum to actually be doing to be supporting ONIX? Actual use of metadata determines an awful lot, and I'm pleased to say Canadian metadata remains better than average. Lots of you use 3.0. A number can do it for both print and digital, even though there's no real use in 3.0 in print yet. And I am pleased to say Indigo confirms that they will almost certainly be supporting 3.0 next year. That was down from 2 years ago, so we now have consistency. I believe next year is actually true, for anyone who's feeling cynical. But based on the metadata I see in BiblioShare, Canada included, many companies' metadata philosophy, sender or receiver, might be distilled down to, no one can make you change. Well, that's as long as a major trading partner will accept you not changing. And the least possible change rules actual use. And that includes using ONIX 3.0 that maintains 2.1 as its model. Many of those tweaks editor added to improve metadata in 3.0, these would be 6 years, 5 to 6 year old tweaks available for a long time, are surprisingly hard to find in use in 3.0. This is a recipe for increased costs. So BiblioShare allows me to see how data from single accounts work and how they work together as an aggregate. And I can say that publishers and their support services are surprisingly cavalier about adhering to standards. True story, a publisher and their major data supplier have a need to communicate information between themselves about distributing the metadata itself. A value is needed in the file to direct that individual record to some location. They chose to use sales restriction. That's fine, but I know about it because they distribute their internal need in their ONIX feed. There is no proprietorial marker to say, ignore sales restriction, any more than there is one for supply detail or contributor. If you put it in an open feed, it means the ISBN has a sales restriction on it. There is limited but real use in the feeds on this point, maybe a couple of thousand records in BiblioShare out of the 3 million. They are now being buried in a proprietorial conversation about 20 times larger. This is the reality for a lot of retailer data. You have data points that you can't find because of the stuff that's lying on top of it that's meaningless. This is a classic example of really poor metadata. Now, publishers cite the need to support as many as 10 flavors of ONIX. As far as I know, there's only one reason you can possibly need to have a flavor of ONIX for distribution, and that's because the company you're sending it for isn't supporting ONIX properly by loading based on the composite and the code values that are given. So they ask you to send a flavor of it back to them so they don't have to do the development work. But then a lot of publishers are not supplying all the values that an end user would need to make the proper selections either. Now, does that sound circular? Because it should and it is. Here is a recipe for decreased costs. Standards work when they achieve a business goal. Data comes in this way and gets displayed or used that way. The effect should be mutually beneficial. Incoming's intent and outgoing's use match the standard's definition. And this is what Chris Sayner's presentation this morning actually illustrated really beautifully. It showed ONIX in use, and although he didn't carry it through to show it actually being used by a retailer, it showed the possibility within the data at any given time. It was a thing of beauty, as opposed to me haranguing you. So why are granular data points important? An author can live in a different country than their nationality, or they might live in more than one place. That's it. That's why contributor place repeats. It's why you need to have a country value and a location, and it needs to repeat, is because there's more than one reason that you need to support it. Now, the question is, why aren't we doing it? And I think the actual answer is quite straightforward. ONIX 2.1 supports this value as a single unit. And the Canadian publishing supply chain shares the least possible change malaise that drives US metadata. Our go-to standard isn't based on need, it's based on what's good enough, because it works in 2.1, even where we have never asked 2.1 to track that data point. And the perception that the US has rejected 3.0 lets us off the hook of development because we can't fight the elephant. Anyway, a usable system needs to be able to associate a region with a focused granular event, and generalized data supported at optimum granularity will save you time and money. If you can't use the information reliably, there's no author findable when they exist for an event, then, or you can't reliably find a Canadian author for, like getting support as a Canadian author, well, the investment you made is useless. It's not return on investment. It's actually, you're matching a need. Okay, I'm speeding up a little here. Basic bibliographic data handled meaningfully and consistently matters more now than ever. The BISG to revamp their committees was done to discuss metadata, need, and distribution. It literally has nothing to do with ONIX, which exists outside of that as a means to communicate the values. It is unlikely that the US will identify a need ONIX does not currently support. And if they identify them as a need, will you implement them in ONIX? You don't have to. I mean, there are other ways to trade data, and there are things you're not telling your partners now. It's completely up to your choice and our industry's choice to make these decisions. The Canadian supply chain should be talking about them too. And this is my question to try and get people talking, but I'm pretty much out of time. So it's maybe rhetorical, but I can tell by the way that the metadata is used in the Canadian market that the Canadian market is handled as a secondary market of the United States. Our market as a defined thing is about as basic as it gets. Is anyone else concerned about that? Because I think we should be. If people want to join any of our committees and discuss these sorts of things in fulsome detail, we would be pleased to have you in that, as part of it.